As I struggled to focus through the haze of post-surgical pain medication, my sister's words crystallized like ice in my veins. "Nathan's gone, Olivia. He's emptied every account while you were under anesthesia." The cardiac monitor betrayed my shock with its quickening beeps, a nurse glancing over with concern as the bitter irony washed over me. Surgeons had just repaired my failing heart valve, while my husband of 8 years had performed his own operation. The clinical extraction of our entire financial life. But as the fog of betrayal began to clear, a cold certainty emerged that transformed my pain into purpose, and I felt my lips curve into the faintest of smiles, because in his meticulous planning, Nathan had overlooked the one asset that would become his undoing. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I met Nathan Caldwell at a fundraising gala for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I was there representing my family's charitable foundation. He was there networking for his investment firm. When he approached me with a glass of champagne and an observation about the underappreciated importance of string sections in modern orchestras, I was immediately charmed by his intelligence and easy confidence. Nathan was everything I thought I wanted: cultured, ambitious, financially savvy, and surprisingly thoughtful. On our third date, he remembered an offhand comment I'd made about loving lilacs and presented me with a small arrangement. On our fifth, he took me to a hidden jazz club I'd mentioned wanting to visit months earlier. "I pay attention to details," he'd said, with that smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "It's what makes me good at my job, and at picking the perfect woman." I believed him, and why wouldn't I? Nathan navigated the world with the certainty of someone who had mapped every inch of it. His confidence was infectious, making me feel simultaneously protected and adventurous when I was with him. We married after 18 months of dating, a small but elegant ceremony at my family's summer home in the Berkshires. My father, Thomas Westbrook, had pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner, his expression uncharacteristically serious for such a joyous occasion. "Financial independence is security, Olivia," he'd said, clasping my hands in his. "Never forget that." At the time, I'd laughed softly, attributing his concern to outdated paternal instincts. My father had built Westbrook Financial Advisors from nothing, instilling in his daughters a respect for financial prudence that bordered on paranoia. But I was marrying a successful investment manager. Surely I was the exception to my father's rule. "Nathan and I are partners, Dad," I replied. "In everything." The slight furrow of his brow should have warned me, but I dismissed it. "Just promise me you'll maintain something of your own," he'd insisted. "Something separate." To appease him, I'd promised. And despite my initial resistance, I'd kept that promise in a way that would prove prophetic. Our early years together were good. At least, they seemed that way. We purchased a brownstone in Boston's Beacon Hill, traveled extensively, and built what appeared to be an enviable life together. Nathan's career flourished at Meridian Capital, where he managed increasingly large portfolios for wealthy clients. I continued my work with the family foundation while also consulting for arts organizations on fundraising strategies. The first sign of trouble came subtly, as it often does. I noticed Nathan's growing interest in our joint finances, not simply managing them, which he'd always done, but an almost obsessive tracking of my income, inheritances, and family connections. At the time, I attributed this to his professional background and attention to detail. Why wouldn't an investment manager want to optimize our financial situation? Then came the frequent questions about my family's holdings, the structure of the Westbrook Trust, the timing of distributions. Again, I justified his curiosity as natural interest in his in-laws' business, perhaps even professional admiration for my father's success. "Your father built something remarkable," Nathan would say, studying our family's annual reports with unusual intensity. The diversification strategy is particularly impressive. I'd beam with pride, both at my father's accomplishments and my husband's appreciation of them. How could I know he was cataloging vulnerabilities rather than strengths? 3 years into our marriage, my father passed away unexpectedly, a stroke that took him in his sleep. The loss devastated our family, but especially me. My father had been my anchor, my advisor, my most trusted confidant. Now he was gone, and I felt adrift in more ways than I could articulate. Nathan was supportive during the funeral, holding my hand through the services, managing arrangements, shielding me from excessive condolences when I became overwhelmed. I leaned on him entirely during those dark days, grateful for his strength when mine had abandoned me. It was during the reading of my father's will that Nathan's demeanor subtly shifted. As the family attorney detailed the distribution of assets, including my significant inheritance, I noticed a new attentiveness in my husband, a sharpened focus that seemed out of place amid our collective grief. 2 months after my father's death, he made a suggestion that seemed practical at the time. "We should consolidate our accounts," Nathan proposed over dinner one evening. "Simplify our financial structure now that your inheritance has come through. It would make everything more efficient." I agreed without much thought, still emotionally exhausted from my loss and grateful for any reduction in administrative complexity. The consolidation happened gradually: joint investment accounts, merged retirement funds, shared access to what had previously been my separate accounts. But not everything. In a private meeting with my father's longtime colleague and my personal financial advisor, James Harrington, I had followed through on my promise to my father. "Your father was insistent about this particular investment," James had explained, showing me documents for a substantial position in a medical technology company called Cardia Innovations. "He wanted this held separately, under your maiden name, managed directly through our family office." "Why the secrecy?" I'd asked, puzzled by the arrangement. James had smiled sadly. "Your father believed in preparation without paranoia. This is just good financial hygiene, as he would say. Diversification of not just investments, but structures. The initial investment represented about 15% of my inheritance. Significant, but not the majority. At the time, Cardia was a promising but unproven company developing next-generation cardiac monitoring technology. The investment seemed speculative compared to the blue-chip securities that comprised the rest of my portfolio, so I didn't mention it to Nathan. Not out of secrecy, I told myself, but because it seemed an unimportant detail given his focus on our primary investment strategies. That decision, or non-decision, would prove to be my financial salvation. The symptoms began subtly, occasional: shortness of breath, unexplained fatigue after climbing the stairs in our brownstone, a persistent fluttering sensation in my chest during exertion. Given my family history of heart issues, my paternal grandmother had required a valve replacement in her 60s. I scheduled a cardiologist appointment, more out of diligence than concern. The diagnosis came as a shock: mitral valve prolapse, with regurgitation, requiring surgical intervention. Not immediately life-threatening, but significant enough to warrant a valve repair procedure within the next few months. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Nathan's reaction surprised me. Rather than the concern I expected, he displayed an unusual level of interest in the scheduling details, the recovery timeline, and the specifics of post-operative care. "You'll be completely under anesthesia?" he asked, reviewing the surgical information packet with remarkable attention to detail. "Yes, for about 5 hours," I confirmed. "Then recover in the ICU overnight before moving to a regular room." He nodded, making notes in his phone. "And full recovery takes 6 to 8 weeks for normal activities, 3 months to feel completely back to normal." In retrospect, I should have recognized the calculations happening behind his concerned expression. The timeline being formulated, the opportunities being assessed, but I saw only a husband preparing to support his wife through a medical challenge. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in April, 3 months from diagnosis. Nathan became unusually attentive during those months, handling more household responsibilities, accompanying me to pre-surgical appointments, even taking over management of all our bill payments and financial matters to reduce your stress before the procedure. How considerate, I thought. How caring. The morning of the surgery arrived with spring sunshine streaming through our bedroom windows. Nathan was solicitous, ensuring I followed pre-surgical protocols, driving me to Massachusetts General Hospital, with my overnight bag, holding my hand as I waited to be called back for preparation. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised, kissing my forehead as the nurse came to escort me to pre-op. They were the last words he would say to me. As my husband, though I didn't know it then, "Count backward from 10, the anesthesiologist instructed as the operating room lights blurred above me. 10, 9, 8. I managed before consciousness slipped away. I would wake to a world irrevocably changed, not just by the repaired valve now regulating the flow of blood through my heart, but by the calculated betrayal executed while surgeons worked to save my life. The persistent beep of the cardiac monitor pulled me from the depths of anesthesia. My throat felt raw from the breathing tube, and a dull ache radiates across my chest where surgeons had accessed my heart. But these physical discomforts paled in comparison to what awaited me. I blinked against the harsh hospital lighting, expecting to see Nathan's face. Instead, my sister Rebecca's worried eyes came into focus. "You're awake," she said, relief evident in her voice as she pressed the call button for the nurse. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I rasped, wincing, at the effort it took to speak. "Where's Nathan?" Rebecca's expression tightened, that familiar crease appearing between her eyebrows, the same one that had appeared when she'd broken her arm at 12, when she'd faced down bullies in high school, when she'd testified against a corporate embezzler as a prosecutor. It was her warrior face, and seeing it now sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "Let's get you checked by the nurses first," she deflected, squeezing my hand as a nurse entered to check my vitals. The post-operative assessment passed in a blur. Blood pressure measurements, incision checks, pain scale questions. I answered mechanically, my attention fixed on Rebecca's evasive behavior regarding my husband's absence. When we cows were finally alone again, I forced myself more upright, ignoring the protest from my sutured chest. "Rebecca, where is Nathan?" I demanded, my voice stronger now despite the pain. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, took both my hands in hers, and looked directly into my eyes. "I received a call from James Harrington this morning," she began, referring to our family's financial advisor. "There were alerts on your accounts, large transfers, withdrawals. When he couldn't reach you because of the surgery, he called me." My heart monitor betrayed my rising anxiety with quickened beeps. "What kind of transfers?" "Systematic emptying of everything, Liv. The joint checking account, your primary savings, the investment portfolio, retirement accounts. Even the home equity line of credit has been maxed out." The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed her words. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." "It's not a mistake," Rebecca interrupted gently. "James has confirmed the transactions. And Nathan." She hesitated, her prosecutor's composure momentarily cracking. "Nathan isn't answering his phone. His assistant at Meridian said he took an emergency leave of absence starting today. His car isn't at your house or at the office." "He wouldn't," I whispered, even as a part of me recognized the terrible truth in her words. "He couldn't have planned this." Rebecca reached for her bag and pulled out her tablet. "James sent over the transaction records. They began the moment. Your surgery started, precisely timed fund transfers, account liquidations, credit line advances, all executed in a 4-hour window while you were unconscious on the operating table." She turned the screen toward me, showing a methodical sequence of financial extractions that coincided exactly with my surgical timeline. The precision was breathtaking and damning. "The timing wasn't coincidental, was it?" I said, my question barely audible. "No," Rebecca confirmed, her voice hardening. "This was planned, Olivia. Meticulously planned to coincide with your surgery, when you'd be completely unable to intervene or even know what was happening until it was too late." The realization washed over me in a wave of nausea stronger than any post-anesthesia effect. Nathan had used my medical vulnerability as a tactical advantage, timing his financial assault to the hour I would be most defenseless. "How much?" I asked, a strange calm beginning to settle over me. "Approximately $3.7 million in liquid assets. Plus, he maxed out joint credit cards for another $120,000. The figure hung in the air between us. Nearly everything I had inherited from my father. Everything Nathan and I had built together over 8 years of marriage, gone in an afternoon. "The brownstone?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "The home equity line was maxed out at $850,000. The property is essentially underwater now." I closed my eyes, picturing our Beacon Hill home with its carefully restored crown molding and the garden where I'd spent countless hours cultivating heirloom roses. Another loss to add to the tally. "Why?" I whispered, more to myself than to Rebecca. "We were happy. At least, I thought we were." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "James found something when he was reviewing recent account activity. Nathan had been transferring small amounts regularly to a separate personal account for over a year. Nothing that would trigger alerts, just a steady siphoning. When James traced those funds..." She hesitated. "Tell me," I insisted. "There's a woman, Olivia, Vanessa Lockwood, financial analyst at Morgan Stanley. The small transfers went to joint travel expenses, restaurants, hotels. They've been seeing each other for at least 14 months. The betrayal deepened, cutting through. A different chamber of my heart than the one surgeons had just repaired. Not just financial predation, but emotional deception as well. A complete destruction of the life I thought we'd built together. The cardiac monitor registered my distress with increasingly rapid beeps, prompting a concerned glance from Rebecca. "Need you to stay calm," she urged. "Your heart needs to heal." A bitter laugh escaped me. Which one? The physical organ or the metaphorical one? Before she could answer, Dr. Patel entered, my cardiologist, a brilliant woman with whom I'd built a rapport during pre-surgical consultations. "Mrs. Caldwell, good to see you awake," she said briskly, reviewing my chart. "Your procedure went very well. The valve repair is holding beautifully." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. My heart valve might be expertly repaired, but everything else in my life had just catastrophically ruptured. After examining me and explaining the post-operative protocols, Dr. Patel addressed my elevated heart rate and blood pressure. "I understand you've received some distressing news," she said carefully, clearly having been briefed by the nursing staff. "I'm going to adjust your medication slightly to help manage your physical response to stress, but I need you to focus on remaining calm. Your body needs to heal." I nodded mechanically, accepting her professional concern while internally calculating how quickly I could reduce pain medication to think clearly. After Dr. Patel left, Rebecca turned to me with the determined expression I recognized from childhood. The one that had intimidated neighborhood bullies and later courtroom opponents. "We need a plan," she said. "James is already initiating security protocols on any accounts Nathan hasn't accessed yet. He's also contacting the banks about fraudulent transfers." "It won't work," I said quietly, the strange calm deepening within me. "Nathan had account access, passwords, authorization. The transfers will appear legitimate." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "We can still fight this, Olivia. I've already called Marcus Chen from my office. He specializes in financial fraud prosecution. And there's the matter of timing it during your surgery, which could constitute exploitation of an incapacitated person." I nodded, acknowledging her words while my mind raced ahead. The legal battle would be necessary but slow, potentially futile given Nathan's careful planning. But there was another angle, one Nathan knew nothing about. "Rebecca," I said softly, "I need you to contact James about something specific, something Nathan doesn't know exists." Her expression shifted from concern to curiosity. "What is it?" "An investment Dad insisted I keep separate. Under my maiden name, I manage directly through the family office. It's a company called Cardia Innovations." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Dad's secret contingency plan for you." "Not so secret anymore," I replied, "and potentially our most valuable asset right now." For the first time since waking to this nightmare, I felt a flicker of something other than shock and betrayal. A small, fierce flame of determination. "Nathan thinks he's destroyed me," I continued, my voice strengthening. "He thinks I'm lying here broken, physically, emotionally, financially. And he's right about the first two. But financially?" A cold smile formed on my lips. "He has no idea what's coming." James Harrington arrived at the hospital the following morning, his tall frame filling the doorway of my room. Despite being in his 60s, he carried himself with the vitality of a much younger man, a testament to his rigorous rowing routine on the Charles River every morning before dawn. Today, however, his usually impeccable appearance showed subtle signs of strain, a slightly loosened tie, the faintest shadow of stubble on his normally clean-shaven face. "You look terrible, James," I said by way of greeting, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Speak for yourself," he replied with the dry humor that had always made him my father's favorite advisor. He approached my bed, his expression softening as he took in the medical equipment surrounding me. "How are you holding up? Physically or emotionally?" "Both, I suppose." I considered the question seriously. "Physically, I'm recovering according to schedule. Emotionally?" I trailed off, unsure how to quantify the complex mixture of shock, betrayal, and emerging resolve that churned within me. James nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. He placed his leather portfolio on the adjustable bed tray and sat in the visitor's chair. "I've brought the Cardia documentation," he said, cutting directly to business in a way that felt comforting in its familiarity. No platitudes, no excessive sympathy, just practical action, exactly what I needed. "How bad is the overall situation?" I asked as he organized various documents. "In terms of what Nathan accessed?" "Quite bad." He was methodical, Olivia. "Joint. Accounts completely emptied. Investment portfolios liquidated with transfers to accounts we haven't yet been able to trace. Retirement funds withdrawn with forged authorization documents. That's actually our strongest legal angle, as it constitutes clear fraud rather than just marital asset division." "And the house?" "The home equity line was maxed out as Rebecca mentioned. The property is effectively underwater given current market conditions." I absorbed this information with surprising detachment, as if we were discussing someone else's financial catastrophe rather than my own. "Total losses?" "Approximately $4.6 million when accounting for penalties, taxes, and early withdrawal fees from retirement funds." The figure hung in the air between us, a devastating sum representing not just money, but years of work, planning, and family legacy. Yet I felt my focus narrowing to the documents James was now arranging on the tray. "And Cardia?" I asked, redirecting our attention to what mattered most now. James's expression shifted slightly, a hint of satisfaction breaking through his professional reserve. "That," he said, "is a very different story." He slid a financial statement toward me. "Your father's initial investment was $650,000, representing approximately 2% ownership in Cardia Innovations, when they were still in early development stages. The company has since secured FDA approval for their cardiac monitoring technology and completed a successful IPO last quarter." My eyes widened as I scanned the current valuation. Is this accurate? Entirely. Your position is now worth approximately $7.8 million based on yesterday's closing price. The shares are held in a separate trust under your maiden name, with management, through Westbrook's private family office. Nathan had no knowledge of this investment, no access, and no legal claim. For the first time since waking to discover Nathan's betrayal, I felt something like genuine relief washing through me. He thought he'd left me with nothing, I murmured, the full implications beginning to dawn on me. Instead, you're in a stronger financial position than before, James confirmed, though obviously that doesn't diminish the criminal nature of his actions or the emotional impact. Rebecca, who had been quietly observing our exchange from the window seat, joined the conversation. Can we use this to go after him? James nodded thoughtfully. It gives us significant resources to pursue, legal action without financial constraints. Most importantly, it means Olivia can focus on recovery rather than immediate financial survival. As they discussed preliminary legal strategies, I found my attention drifting to the Cardea financial statements. The company name derived from Cardea, the ancient Roman goddess of thresholds and hinges, doorways between one state and another. How appropriate that this investment would now serve as my doorway from victimhood to power. I want to liquidate a portion, I decided, interrupting their conversation. Enough to fund comprehensive legal action and secure temporary living arrangements once I'm discharged. James considered this. I'd recommend a 10% liquidation initially. That would provide approximately $780,000 in working capital without significantly impacting your equity position in a growing company. Do it, I authorized, a plan already forming in my mind. And James, I need information. Everything you can find about Nathan's current whereabouts, financial movements, and especially about Vanessa Lockwood. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. You're moving quickly for someone who just had open-heart surgery. Nathan didn't waste any time, I replied evenly. Why should I? Dr. Patel arrived then for her morning rounds, frowning slightly at the financial documents spread across my bed tray. Mrs. Caldwell, I believe we discussed minimizing stress during your recovery. This isn't stress, doctor. This is strategy, I replied, earning a small smile from Rebecca. After checking my surgical site and reviewing my vital signs, Dr. Patel delivered her assessment. You're healing well physically, but I'm concerned about your accelerated recovery plans. Standard. Protocol recommends at least 5 days in the hospital following valve repair surgery. And if I were to accelerate that timeline? I asked. Her expression turned professionally stern. I wouldn't advise it. Your body needs proper time to heal. I understand, but hypothetically, what would be the absolute minimum hospital stay? With appropriate home nursing care? Dr. Patel studied me carefully, seeming to recognize the determination behind my question. With 24-hour professional nursing, carefully managed pain protocols, and assuming no complications, 3 days minimum. But I must emphasize this would be against medical recommendation. I nodded, filing away this information. Thank you for your candor, doctor. After she left, Rebecca fixed me with a concerned look. You're not seriously considering leaving this soon? Every day I remain here is another day Nathan has to cover his tracks, I replied. I need to be mobile, functional, and fully engaged in the response. James cleared his throat. While I understand your urgency, Olivia, there are many actions we can take immediately without compromising your recovery. The legal team can begin filing emergency motions to freeze any assets we can locate. Financial forensics can track transfer patterns. Private investigation can establish Nathan's whereabouts. He was right, of course. My impulse to physically pursue Nathan stemmed more from emotional reaction than strategic thinking, a fundamental error I couldn't afford. You're right, I conceded. Begin all of those processes immediately. And add something else. I want specialized security protocols established before I leave the hospital. If Nathan was calculating enough to plan this during my surgery, we need to assume he's monitoring my condition and location. Rebecca's expression darkened. You think he might try to contact you? Or worse? I think Nathan has revealed himself to be someone I never truly knew, I replied carefully. That means I can't predict his actions with any certainty. Better to be overprepared than vulnerable again. The next several hours transformed my hospital room into an impromptu command center. James coordinated with the legal team at Westbrook Financial, initiating emergency petitions to freeze Nathan's known accounts. Rebecca leveraged her prosecutorial contacts to fast-track fraud investigations. A private security consultant, a former FBI agent named Diana Mercer, who handled executive protection for my father's firm, arrived to assess vulnerabilities and establish protocols. Your primary residence is compromised, Diana stated bluntly after her preliminary assessment. We need alternative accommodations ready for your discharge. Already arranged, James confirmed. The Westbrook property in Cambridge. Limited access. Points? Gated entrance? Private security already in place for the compound. I nodded approval, grateful for their efficiency while simultaneously disturbed by the necessity of such measures. How had my life transformed so completely in less than 48 hours, from trusting wife to cardiac patient to potential target? As evening approached, my medical reality reasserted itself. Pain medication began wearing off, bringing with it waves of discomfort that radiates across my chest. The cardiac monitor registered increases in heart rate and blood pressure that prompted nursing intervention. You need rest, the night nurse admonished gently, adjusting my medication and shooting. My sister and advisors from the room. Recovery requires sleep, not strategy sessions. Alone in the dimming light of my hospital room, I finally allowed myself a moment of genuine emotional release. The tears came silently, sliding down my temples into my hair, as I processed the magnitude of Nathan's betrayal. 8 years of marriage. Countless shared moments, dreams, plans for the future, all revealed as elaborate fiction, a long con perpetrated by a man who had calculated the optimal moment to abandon me at my most vulnerable. But beneath the grief, something harder was crystallizing, a cold clarity of purpose that felt almost foreign. The woman Nathan had married, trusting, somewhat naive despite my financial background, willing to see the best in others, was gone, transformed by betrayal into someone more formidable. My father's voice seemed to whisper from memory. Financial independence is security, Olivia. Never forget that. He had been right in ways neither of us could have foreseen. His insistence on maintaining separate assets, his creation of the Cardia investment under my maiden name, these weren't just financial precautions but prescient, protections against a threat he'd somehow sensed when I could not. As medically inadvisable pain medication reduction allowed for clearer thinking, I began mental cataloging of resources and priorities. Nathan believed he had executed the perfect extraction, leaving me physically weakened, emotionally devastated, and financially ruined. His certainty would be his vulnerability, just as my trust had been mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very heart condition that had given Nathan his opportunity for betrayal had also inadvertently connected me to my salvation. Without my cardiac diagnosis, I might never have learned about Nathan's true nature until he had managed to access everything, including, potentially, the hidden Cardia investment. As sleep finally began to claim me, I made a resolution that would guide everything to come. Nathan's calculated cruelty would be met not with emotional reaction, but with methodical response. He had spent months planning his betrayal. I would be equally meticulous in my pursuit of justice. My newly repaired heart continued its steady rhythm, each beat affirming a transformation occurring beyond the physical, from victim to hunter, from betrayed to avenger. By the third day post-surgery, my hospital room had transformed into an operational headquarters. Rebecca had arranged for a secure laptop and encrypted communication devices. James had established a dedicated team at Westbrook Financial to trace Nathan's financial footprint, and Diana Mercer had implemented comprehensive security protocols that included screening all hospital visitors and monitoring surveillance feeds. The morning began with a briefing from Marcus Chen, Rebecca's colleague who specialized in financial crimes prosecution. Tall and meticulously dressed in a charcoal suit that screamed federal prosecutors despite his current private practice, Marcus radiated the precise combination of legal brilliance and predatory instinct I needed. "We've identified 3 separate strands of potentially criminal activity," he explained, organizing documents on my bed tray with surgical precision. "First, the forged signatures on retirement account withdrawals. That's straightforward fraud. Second, the timing of the transactions during your surgery could constitute exploitation of an incapacitated person under Massachusetts law. Third, we found evidence of advanced planning that suggests premeditation, which strengthens both criminal and civil cases." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, careful not to disturb the IV line still delivering antibiotics into my arm. Marcus displayed several documents on his tablet. "Email records recovered from your home computer system show Nathan researching offshore banking options dating back approximately 7 months. He also conducted multiple searches about countries with limited extradition treaties with the U.S., primarily in the Caribbean and Southeast Asia." The revelation sent a chill through me. Nathan's betrayal hadn't been a sudden decision or emotional reaction. It had been methodically planned for more than half a year, probably initiated shortly after my first episodes of cardiac symptoms. "There's more," Marcus continued, swiping to another screen. 3 months ago, he opened a private mailbox under a slightly altered version of his name, Nathan C. Wells instead of Caldwell. He's been receiving correspondence there from various financial institutions in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Belize. Rebecca, who had been quietly observing from her usual position by the window, interjected, "How did you find this?" "Diana's team," Marcus replied with a respectful nod toward the security consultant, who stood sentinel-like near the door. "They're very thorough." "Have you located him?" I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since awakening. To his absence, Diana stepped forward, her movements efficient and controlled, a physical manifestation of her former FBI training. "We confirmed our trip to Grand Cayman 2 days ago. He flew commercials under his own name, apparently confident that his timing provided sufficient head start. Based on credit card activity, he's staying at the Ritz-Carlton on 7 Mile Beach." The image flashed unbidden in my mind. Nathan lounging on pristine white sand, perhaps sipping some tropical cocktail, while I lay tethered to cardiac monitors in a sterile hospital room. The contrast ignited something beyond anger, something colder and more focused. "And Vanessa Lockwood?" I asked, determined to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Diana consulted her tablet. "Still in Boston as of this morning. We have her under surveillance. She appears to be continuing her normal routine at Morgan Stanley, though she's made several calls to burner phones we can't trace. Our working theory is that she's maintaining her position to avoid raising suspicions while Nathan establishes their financial foundation offshore. They're planning to reunite," I concluded, the pieces falling into place, "once he's secured the money in jurisdictions beyond our easy reach." "That's our assessment," Diana confirmed. Based on travel searches conducted on her home computer, she researched flights to Grand Cayman departing next week. I absorbed this information, mentally calculating timelines. So we have a narrow window before she joins him, and they potentially move to a less accessible location. James, who had been silently taking notes throughout the briefing, looked up with concern. "Olivia, you need to focus on your recovery. The legal and investigative teams can handle—" "I am focusing on my recovery," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the dull ache radiating across my chest. "But recovery doesn't just mean physical healing. It means reclaiming what was taken and ensuring consequences for the person who took it." Dr. Patel's arrival temporarily paused our strategy session. She frowned slightly at the assembled team, but said nothing as she checked my surgical site and vital signs. "Your recovery is progressing well," she assessed, making notes in my chart. "But I still have concerns about your stress levels. The body heals best when the mind isn't constantly in crisis mode." "I understand, doctor," I replied, having rehearsed this conversation in my mind. "But I believe taking control of my situation is actually reducing my stress. Helplessness would be far more damaging to my recovery." She studied me for a moment, her experienced eyes seeing more than I might have wanted to reveal. "You're planning to check out early, aren't you?" The directness of her question momentarily surprised me. "I'm considering all options for my continued recovery." Dr. Patel sighed, clearly recognizing the determination behind my diplomatic phrasing. "Medically speaking, discharge tomorrow would be premature. However," she continued, preempting my prepared arguments, "with appropriate home nursing, care and strict adherence to medication protocols, it wouldn't be catastrophically risky." Relief washed through me. This was the medical clearance I needed to implement the next phase of my strategy. "I'll arrange for comprehensive home care," James assured Dr. Patel. "Round-the-clock nursing, physical therapy, cardiac monitoring, whatever Olivia needs." After extracting promises regarding medication adherence and follow-up appointments, Dr. Patel reluctantly agreed to prepare discharge papers for the following morning, exactly 4 days after my surgery. Once she departed, our planning resumed with renewed urgency. "We need to move quickly," I said, wincing slightly as I shifted to a more upright position. "Nathan believes I'm still confined to this hospital bed, physically weakened and financially devastated. That misconception is our greatest advantage." Marcus nodded, his prosecutor's instincts clearly aligned with my thinking. Element of surprise is critical in financial crime cases. The moment he realizes you're mobilizing resources, he'll accelerate his plans to move assets beyond reach. "What's our first move?" Rebecca asked. I turned to James. "Has the partial liquidation of Cardia shares been completed?" "Yesterday afternoon," he confirmed. "Approximately $780,000 is now available in your secure account under your maiden name." "Good. I want to divide it into 3 operational funds," I instructed, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. "First, a legal fund for Marcus and his team to initiate emergency court actions in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. Second, an investigation fund for Diana to expand her team's capabilities and reach. Third, a recovery fund for my immediate needs and operational expenses." James nodded, making notes. "And the priority targets?" 2 parallel tracks, I replied without hesitation. Legal actions to freeze Nathan's known accounts before he can transfer funds to less accessible jurisdictions, and physical surveillance in Grand Cayman to document his activities and identify all financial institutions he's working with. Diana's expression shifted slightly, the subtle change of a professional calculating resources and logistics. "I have contacts in Grand Cayman from my FBI days. I can have a team in place within 24 hours. "Do it," I authorized. "I want eyes on Nathan at all times. Every meeting, every bank, every contact." Marcus cleared his throat. "For maximum impact, I recommend coordinating the legal filings with direct confrontation. Once the accounts are frozen, Nathan should learn about it from us, not from a banker." The psychological impact of realizing you're not as vulnerable as he assumed will potentially lead to errors in judgment on his part. The suggestion resonated with something primal within me. The desire to see Nathan's face when he realized his perfect plan had catastrophically failed. But I forced myself to evaluate the recommendation strategically, rather than emotionally. "Agreed," I said after a moment's consideration. "But the timing must be precise. We freeze everything first, then deliver the message when he has no immediate way to move remaining assets." As the team dispersed to implement their respective responsibilities, Rebecca remained behind, studying me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "This isn't just about recovery, is it?" she asked quietly. "This is about making him pay." I met her gaze steadily. "It's about justice, Rebecca. Nathan didn't just take money. He took my trust, my sense of security, my belief in my own judgment. Those things don't have a dollar value, but they still demand restitution." She nodded slowly. "I understand. Just remember that your life doesn't have to be defined by his betrayal or your response to it. There's an after to all of this." Her words lingered with me after she left to coordinate with Marcus on the legal filings. And after, the concept, seemed almost abstract, like trying to imagine a coastline while still caught in a violent storm at sea. But Rebecca was right. This phase, however all-consuming it felt, would eventually end. The question was, what would remain of me when it did? That evening, as hospital sounds faded into the quieter rhythms of night, I reviewed the comprehensive strategy we had developed. Legal filings prepared for simultaneous submission in Massachusetts, New York, Florida, and the Cayman Islands. Surveillance teams mobilizing in Grand Cayman. Financial forensics tracing every electronic footprint Nathan had left in his hasty departure. Diana's team had already uncovered evidence that Nathan had established accounts at First Caribbean International Bank and Butterfield Bank in Grand Cayman, with preliminary transactions suggesting he was creating a layered structure designed to obscure ownership and frustrate recovery efforts. He'd been thorough in his planning, methodical in his execution. But his plan had one fundamental flaw. It assumed I would be too physically weakened, emotionally devastated, and financially ruined to mount an effective response. He'd planned for the woman he thought he'd married, trusting, somewhat naive, conflict-averse. He hadn't planned for the woman that betrayal had created. The night nurse entered to check my vitals and administer evening medications, her experienced eyes noting the papers spread across my bed. "You should be resting," she admonished gently, adjusting my IV line. "I'll rest when this is finished," I replied, offering a smile to soften my determination. She shook her head slightly, but didn't press the issue, perhaps recognizing the resolve that had taken root within me. As she administered the reduced pain medication I'd negotiated with Dr. Patel, I found myself thinking about Nathan alone in his luxury hotel room in Grand Cayman, perhaps celebrating his successful extraction with expensive room service and champagne. Did he feel any remorse? Any twinge of conscience about abandoning his wife of 8 years as she recovered from heart surgery? Or was he simply relieved that his long con had finally reached its profitable conclusion? It didn't matter, I decided, as I carefully organized the documents into folders for tomorrow's discharge. His feelings, or lack thereof, were irrelevant to what would come next. Because while Nathan was sipping champagne and setting up offshore accounts, secure in the belief that he'd left his wife destitute and defeated, he remained blissfully unaware of two critical facts. Knew exactly where he was and what he was doing, and I had $7.8 million in cardiac technology shares he knew nothing about. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of his reckoning. Hospital discharge was an exercise in controlled pain. Despite the medical team's best efforts, each movement sent waves of discomfort radiating from my surgical site. The short journey from hospital bed to wheelchair to the waiting private medical transport tested my physical endurance more than I cared to admit. "You can still reconsider," Dr. Patel said as she supervised the transfer, her professional concern evident. "Another day or two of hospital monitoring would be prudent." "Thank you, doctor, but my decision is made," I replied, carefully settling into the specialized transport seat Diana's team had arranged, designed to minimize pressure, on my chest while providing necessary support. Dr. Patel sighed, handing me a folder of discharge instructions and prescriptions. "You're officially the most determined patient I've had this year. Promise you'll call immediately if you experience any concerning symptoms," I promised, grateful for her care despite my resistance to her medical recommendations. As the transport Vehicle pulled away from Massachusetts General, I felt a curious mixture of vulnerability and resolve. Physical weakness battling strategic determination. The journey to the Westbrook family compound in Cambridge took 40 minutes. Each bump and turn in the road a fresh reminder of my body's fragility. Rebecca rode beside me, monitoring my condition with sisterly vigilance, while maintaining a steady stream of updates on our rapidly evolving operation. Marcus filed the emergency actions in all 4 jurisdictions simultaneously an hour ago, she reported, reading from her secure tablet. The Massachusetts and New York judges granted immediate freezing orders on all domestic accounts we've identified. Florida will hear the petition this afternoon. The Cayman Islands Financial Authority has acknowledged receipt but requires a hearing, scheduled for tomorrow morning. And Diana's team? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Operational in Grand Cayman since early this morning. Nathan followed. His usual routine, breakfast on his private balcony, then meetings at First Caribbean International Bank for approximately 3 hours. He's currently having lunch at a waterfront restaurant called Blue by Eric Reipert. Apparently, betrayal works up an appetite. The bitterness in her tone mirrored my own thoughts. The image of Nathan dining on gourmet cuisine overlooking turquoise waters while I endured the pain of early discharge was particularly galling. But emotional reactions wouldn't serve our purpose. Have the domestic account freezes been processed by the banks? I asked, redirecting focus to our operational timeline. Rebecca nodded. Fully implemented as of 30 minutes ago. The moment Nathan attempts any transaction through those channels, he'll discover they're inaccessible. Good, I said, a cold satisfaction settling over me. Now we wait for the first indication he's discovered our countermeasures. The Westbrook family compound came into view. A sprawling colonial-style estate, set back from the road behind wrought iron gates and mature oak trees. My grandmother had purchased the property in the 1960s when Cambridge real estate was merely expensive rather than stratospheric, and over decades it had evolved into a secure family compound with the main house and 3 smaller residences within its walled perimeter. We proceeded to the garden house, the smallest of the residences, but still a comfortable 3-bedroom structure nestled among carefully tended perennial gardens. Diana's security team had already established a perimeter, with discreet but vigilant personnel positioned at strategic points throughout the compound. Inside, the house had been transformed to accommodate both my medical needs and our operational requirements. The main living room now contained hospital-grade monitoring equipment, a specialized reclining bed, and an array of communication technology. The dining room had become a command center with multiple screens displaying financial data, surveillance, feeds, and legal documents. James was already present, coordinating with the Westbrook financial team via video conference. He ended the call as we entered, his expression reflecting both concern for my condition and excitement about operational developments. "How was the transfer?" he asked, helping me carefully settle into the adjustable medical recliner. "Manageable," I replied, not bothering to elaborate on the pain the journey had caused. "What's the latest?" "Significant progress on multiple fronts," he reported, gesturing toward the main screen where a flowchart displayed Nathan's financial network as we had reconstructed it. "We've identified 17 separate accounts across 6 financial institutions that Nathan established in preparation for his exit. 14 are now frozen through court orders. The remaining 3 are in jurisdictions requiring additional legal steps." "What's the total amount secured?" I asked. "Approximately $3.2 million frozen in accessible accounts," James replied. "We estimate another $1.4 million remains in the unfrozen offshore accounts, primarily in Belize and Singapore. Over 70% contained. Better than I had dared hope at this stage." Nathan's preference for recognized financial centers rather than more obscure havens had worked against him. While places like the Cayman Islands offered significant privacy, they nevertheless maintained legal frameworks that allowed for asset freezing under certain conditions, particularly when evidence of underlying fraud existed. The private nurse, Rebecca had arranged, a calm, efficient woman named Elise with specialized cardiac recovery experience, arrived to establish my baseline vitals and administer scheduled medication. I reluctantly agreed to a brief rest period while the team continued operational preparations. When I awoke 2 hours later, refreshed despite the persistent discomfort, Diana had joined the assembly in the command center. She approached my recliner with her tablet, her expression indicating significant developments. "Nathan has discovered the account freezes," she reported without preamble. "Approximately 40 minutes ago, he attempted to access the First Caribbean account and was denied. According to our surveillance team, he immediately made several agitated phone calls, including one to what we believe is a burner phone associated with Vanessa Lockwood. Do we have audio?" I asked, carefully adjusting to a more upright position. Diana nodded, tapping her tablet to play a recording. Nathan's voice emerged, tense and hushed, despite his obvious agitation. "Something's wrong with the accounts. All of them. They're saying there's a legal hold." A pause. "No, not just one bank. I've checked 3 so far. Someone's found us." Another longer pause. "Of course it's her. Who else could it be? I don't know how, but she's managed to—" His voice lowered further, becoming barely audible. "Change of plans. Move everything forward. Get on the first available flight. We need to implement contingency protocols." The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Nathan's panic was evident, but so was his determination to salvage his plan. The reference to contingency protocols was particularly concerning. "He's going to attempt to move the unfrozen funds immediately," I said, voicing what everyone was thinking, "and potentially relocate to a less accessible jurisdiction." Marcus, who had joined us via secure video link from his office, nodded grimly. "This is the most dangerous phase. He's aware of our actions, but still has access to significant resources. We need to cut off his remaining financial avenues immediately." "What about Vanessa?" Rebecca asked. "Diana, is your team still monitoring?" "Her in Boston?" "Continuously," Diana confirmed. "Since this call, she's canceled her afternoon meetings at Morgan Stanley and returned to her apartment. She appears to be packing. I considered our options, weighing strategic priorities against operational capabilities. We need to split our focus. Marcus, escalate the legal actions in Belize and Singapore, whatever it takes to freeze those remaining accounts within hours, not days. Diana, maintain surveillance on both targets but prioritize Nathan. If he attempts to leave Grand Cayman, I want to know immediately." "And Vanessa?" Rebecca asked. A cold clarity settled over me. "Let her come to him." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You want her to reach Grand Cayman?" "I want them together when everything collapses," I confirmed. "This isn't just about Nathan. It's about both of them. The full extent of their betrayal should be met with the full measure of consequences." James looked concerned. "That's risky, Olivia. If they reunite, they could potentially access resources we haven't identified or tracked. Or, I countered, they could make critical mistakes under pressure that give us additional leverage. Besides, Diana's team will be monitoring their every move." Diana nodded her agreement. "Having both targets in the same location actually simplifies our surveillance requirements. And Cayman authorities are more likely to cooperate with us than if they split up across multiple jurisdictions." The decision made, our team dispersed to implement the revised strategy. Marcus to accelerate legal actions in the remaining financial havens. Diana to coordinate surveillance teams tracking both Nathan and Vanessa. James to continue forensic financial analysis to identify any accounts we might have missed. As evening approached, Elise insisted on another round of cardiac monitoring and medication. The data showed my heart functioning normally despite the stress of the day, a small but significant victory for my physical recovery. Rebecca brought dinner, forcing me to eat despite my limited appetite. "You can't wage financial warfare on an empty stomach," she insisted, setting up a tray with my favorite comfort food from childhood, tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. As we ate, she studied me with the penetrating gaze that had made her such a formidable prosecutor. "How are you really doing, Liv? Not the strategic mastermind version you're showing everyone else. The real you." The question pierced the armor I'd carefully constructed since waking in the hospital. For a moment, I considered maintaining the facade of cold determination. But this was Rebecca, my sister, my closest confidant since childhood. "I'm shattered," I admitted quietly. Physically, obviously. But deeper than that. 8 years of marriage, nearly a decade of my life invested in someone who could calculate the optimal moment to abandon me during heart surgery. What does that say about my judgment? About my understanding of human nature? Rebecca reached across to squeeze my hand gently. "It says nothing about you and everything about him. Sociopaths are exceptionally skilled at appearing normal, caring, even loving when it serves their purposes." "Do you think that's what he is? A sociopath?" She considered the question seriously. "I've prosecuted enough white-collar criminals to recognize the pattern, the careful planning, the compartmentalization, the ability to maintain a convincing facade while orchestrating betrayal. Whether he meets the clinical definition hardly matters. His actions speak for themselves." I nodded, finding strange comfort in this clinical assessment. If Nathan's betrayal reflected a fundamental deficiency in his character, rather than a failure in my judgment, perhaps I could eventually trust myself again. A notification chime from Rebecca's tablet interrupted our conversation. She checked the screen, her expression tightening. "Vanessa's on the move. She's booked on the 10:30 p.m. flight to Miami, connecting to Grand Cayman tomorrow morning." "And Nathan?" "Still at the hotel, but Diana's team reports increased activity. He's made multiple calls to private banking contacts and appears to be preparing contingency measures." I nodded, calculating our next steps. "The Cayman Financial Authority hearing is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. If we secure a freezing order there, his remaining accessible funds in that jurisdiction will be contained. But he'll still have Belize and Singapore," Rebecca pointed out. "Not for long," I replied, a cold certainty settling over me. Marcus has connections in both jurisdictions pushing for emergency action based on the U.S. fraud evidence. By this time tomorrow, Nathan will discover what it feels like to have everything taken in an instant, just as he had done to me. As night fell over Cambridge, I found myself reflecting on the speed with which life could transform. 5 days ago, Olivia Caldwell, confident in my marriage, focused on recovering from necessary heart surgery. Now, I was effectively Olivia Westbrook again, orchestrating a multi-jurisdictional financial and legal operation against the man who had betrayed me at my most vulnerable moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same surgical vulnerability Nathan had exploited had inadvertently protected the asset he'd never known about. Had I not needed heart surgery, he might have continued his charade indefinitely, potentially discovering the Cardia investment eventually and including it in his extraction. My father's insistence on financial independence, the separate investment he'd structured under my maiden name, had proven prophetic in ways neither of us could have anticipated. As I drifted toward sleep, medicated but alert enough to process the day's developments, I found myself silently thanking him for the foresight that was now making justice possible. Tomorrow would bring the next phase of our operation. And Nathan's first real understanding that his perfect crime was rapidly unraveling. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. The command center in the dining room buzzed with updates from our teams across multiple jurisdictions. Diana's surveillance operation in Grand Cayman reported that Nathan had checked out of the Ritz-Carlton at dawn, relocating to a more secluded villa on the island's eastern shore, a clear attempt to evade detection. "He's running," James observed as we reviewed the surveillance photos showing Nathan hurriedly loading luggage into a rental car. "The account freezes have him spooked." "Not," Running yet, I corrected, studying the images carefully. Repositioning. If he were truly fleeing, he'd have left the island entirely. This is a tactical retreat to assess and regroup. Diana nodded agreement. Our assessment as well. The villa appears to be a private property with minimal staff and restricted access. He's creating a controlled environment where he believes he can operate with less scrutiny. Do we have eyes inside? I asked, wincing slightly as Elise adjusted my medication port. Despite a relatively good night's sleep, my surgical site throbbed with persistent pain, a reminder of physical limitations I couldn't afford to acknowledge. External surveillance only, Diana replied. But we've established monitoring on all communication channels and positioned teams at the only 2 access roads to the property. Marcus joined our briefing via secure video link, his expression reflecting cautious optimism. The Cayman Financial Authority hearing is scheduled for 9:08 a.m. local time, about 2 hours from now. Our legal team on the ground has been granted priority placement due to the evidence of underlying fraud. Additionally, Singapore authorities have implemented a preliminary freeze pending formal review, though Belize remains problematic. I absorbed this information, mentally calculating our position. With domestic accounts already frozen, and Cayman likely to follow suit this morning, Nathan would soon find his financial options severely constrained. The Singapore development was an unexpected bonus, leaving only the Belize accounts as his remaining accessible resources. What's our estimate on the Belize holdings? I asked James. He consulted his notes. Approximately $580,000 based on wire transfer records we've reconstructed. Not insignificant, but considerably less than what we've already contained. And Vanessa's status? Diana checked her tablet. Her flight landed in Miami 20 minutes ago. She's scheduled on the 10:30 a.m. connection to Grand Cayman, arriving at 11:45 local time. Perfect timing. By the time Vanessa reached Grand Cayman, the Financial Authority hearing would be concluded, likely with another freezing order in place. She would arrive to find Nathan's carefully constructed financial sanctuary crumbling around him. I want to observe the Cayman hearing, I decided, carefully adjusting my position in the medical recliner. Can we arrange secure video access? Marcus looked concerned. It's technically possible, but are you sure that's necessary? I can have our local counsel provide real-time updates. I need to see it, I interrupted, my tone brooking no argument. Not just hear about it afterward. I need to witness the process unfold. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus nodded. I'll make the arrangements. The hearing is scheduled to be conducted via their secure judicial portal due to the international elements. We should be able to establish observer access through our legal team. As the team dispersed to prepare for the hearing, Rebecca approached, with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. Your pain levels are increasing, she observed quietly. Not a question, but a statement. Elise mentioned your last vitals showed elevated blood pressure and heart rate. I shrugged slightly, immediately, regretting the movement as pain flared across my chest. Manageable. Olivia, she pressed, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. I understand the need to see this through, but pushing your physical recovery too hard could have serious consequences. Heart surgery isn't something to take lightly. I know my limits, I replied, softening my tone to take the edge off my determination. And right now, this is more important than perfect adherence to recovery protocols. Rebecca studied me for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Just promise me you'll tell someone if the pain becomes severe. Cardiac stress during recovery isn't something to ignore, I promised. Though we both knew my threshold for what constituted severe had shifted considerably since awakening to Nathan's betrayal. Physical pain seemed almost secondary compared to the imperative of bringing him to justice. At 8:45 a.m., we gathered around the main display screen where Marcus had arranged secure access to the Cayman Financial Authority proceedings. The hearing room appeared on screen, a formal space with the authority's 5-member panel seated at an elevated bench Legal representatives arranged at tables below. Our counsel, a distinguished Caymanian attorney named Victoria Pembroke, sat ready with her team, while the opposing table remained conspicuously empty. "No representation for Nathan yet," James observed. "Interesting strategy." "Not strategy," I replied. Panic. He likely hasn't had time to secure proper legal representation since discovering the account freezes yesterday. As if confirming my assessment, the doors to the hearing room opened moments before the scheduled start time, and a harried-looking man in a slightly rumpled suit hurried to the respondent's table. He appeared to be arranging papers frantically as the authority chairwoman called the session to order. "This special hearing of the Cayman Islands Financial Authority is now in session," she announced, her British-inflected accent carrying authority. "We are convened to consider petition CFA 2023-117 regarding emergency asset preservation measures requested in the matter of Westbrook v. Caldwell." The proceedings moved with surprising efficiency. Victoria presented our case methodically, submitting evidence of the fraudulent signatures on retirement account withdrawals, the timing of transactions during my surgery, and documentation of Nathan's advance planning. Most damning was the evidence connecting the forged documents with transfers to Cayman accounts, establishing a clear chain of fraudulent activity. Nathan's hastily acquired counsel attempted to argue that these were simply marital asset divisions that should be handled through divorce proceedings rather than financial authority intervention, but his arguments lacked the supporting documentation that Victoria had meticulously provided. The authority panel asked pointed questions about jurisdiction, the nature of the alleged fraud, and the urgency of the preservation measures. Victoria handled each query with precision, occasionally consulting with her team or referencing specific documents from the substantial evidence package. After approximately 45 minutes of presentations and questions, the panel chair called for a brief recess to deliberate. The screen switched to a holding image of the authority's seal as we waited anxiously for their decision. "Assessment?" I asked Marcus, who had been taking notes throughout the proceeding. "Extremely positive," he replied without hesitation. Victoria was impeccably prepared, and the respondent's counsel was clearly caught flat-footed. More importantly, the panel's questions focused on technical details of implementation, rather than questioning the fundamental basis for the freezing orders. James nodded agreement. The chairwoman's body language shifted noticeably when Victoria presented the forged signature evidence. That appeared to be a turning point. The wait was shorter than expected. Less than 15 minutes later, the panel returned and the screen switched back to the hearing room. The chairwoman adjusted her microphone and delivered their decision without preamble. Having reviewed the evidence presented and in accordance with Section 14.3 of the Financial Services Act, this authority hereby grants the emergency preservation order as requested by the petitioner. All accounts identified in Schedule A are to be frozen effective immediately pending full investigation or further order of this authority. Respondent's counsel is advised that appeal procedures are available as outlined in Section 18 of the Act, should your client wish to contest this ruling. A wave of satisfaction washed over me as the chairwoman continued with the technical details of the order's implementation. Nathan's Cayman resources were now officially beyond his reach, the noose tightening further around his financial escape plan. On screen, Nathan's counsel looked stunned, frantically taking notes as the chairwoman detailed the freezing protocols. Victoria maintained professional composure, but the slight smile at the corner of her mouth betrayed her satisfaction with the outcome. As the hearing concluded, Diana's tablet chimed with an incoming message from her team in Grand Cayman. "Nathan's just received notification of the authority's decision," she reported, reading the update. "Our surveillance team reports he's displaying visible agitation, pacing, shouting into his phone. He appears to be attempting to contact his banking representatives without success." I nodded, imagining the scene. Nathan's growing panic as he discovered each financial avenue systematically closed to him. The controlled, confident man who had methodically planned my financial destruction now faced his own Update on Vanessa? I asked. Her flight from Miami departed on schedule. Expected arrival in Grand Cayman in approximately 1 hour. We have a team positioned at the airport to track her movements from arrival. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The legal vice tightening around Nathan's finances, Vanessa en route to join him just as his carefully constructed sanctuary began to crumble, surveillance teams documenting every panicked reaction and desperate countermeasure. Next steps? Rebecca asked, the prosecutor in her clearly satisfied. With our progress but focused on maintaining momentum. 3 parallel tracks, I replied, the strategy crystallizing as I spoke. First, Marcus continues pursuing the Belize accounts, the last significant financial resource Nathan can access. Second, Diana maintains surveillance as Nathan and Vanessa reunite and potentially attempt to implement whatever contingency protocols he mentioned yesterday. Third, I paused, knowing my next directive would generate resistance. I need to speak with Nathan directly. The expected objections came immediately and from multiple directions. Absolutely not, Rebecca protested. There's no strategic advantage to personal contact at this stage. Too risky, Diana added, her security assessment immediate and unequivocal. Direct communication could compromise our operational security and give him information about our capabilities. Olivia, James said more gently, there's nothing to gain from speaking with him that our legal and surveillance operations aren't already accomplishing. I waited for their concerns to exhaust themselves before responding. I understand your perspectives, but this isn't a request open for debate. Nathan took everything from me while I was unconscious and vulnerable. He deserves to hear directly from me that his plan has failed, and why. The room fell silent, my team recognizing the steel beneath my quiet determination. After a moment, Diana spoke first. If you're determined to make contact, we need to establish strict protocols, secure communication channels, limited information, sharing predetermined timeframes, and absolutely no disclosure of your location or physical condition. I nodded in agreement. Set it up. I want to speak with him after Vanessa arrives, when they're both present and have fully processed the Cayman freezing orders. As the team began preparing for this unexpected communication, Elise insisted on a complete medical assessment. The morning's activities had clearly taxed my still-healing body, with elevated heart rate and blood pressure readings that concerned her professional judgment. You need rest, she stated firmly, adjusting my medication. At least 2 hours of uninterrupted recovery time. Your body is sending clear signals that you're pushing too hard. I wanted to resist, but the increasing pain and fatigue made her assessment difficult to dispute. Reluctantly, I agreed to a rest period while the team continued operational preparations. I reclined in the specialized medical chair, allowing the adjusted pain medication to take effect. I found myself reflecting on the rapid transformation of the past week. From trusting wife to betrayed victim to orchestrator of a multi-jurisdictional counterattack, each role requiring a different version of myself. The woman who had entered surgery 5 days ago no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, more calculating and far more dangerous, forged in the crucible of betrayal and emerging with a single-minded focus on justice. Nathan had believed his perfect crime would leave me broken beyond recovery. Instead, it had created his most formidable adversary, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. As sleep finally claimed me, I carried one thought into unconsciousness. Before this day ended, Nathan would hear my voice and know exactly who had dismantled his escape plan piece by piece. Elise finally cleared me to return to the command center after my enforced rest period, though her professional disapproval remained evident in the tight set of her mouth. The medical monitoring equipment showed my vitals had stabilized, not optimal by cardiac recovery standards, but within acceptable parameters for someone 5 days post-surgery. The team had continued operational preparations during my absence. Diana had established secure communication protocols for my planned conversation with Nathan, ensuring the call couldn't be traced to our location. Marcus had accelerated the Belize banking actions, leveraging political connections to expedite what would normally be a lengthy bureaucratic process. James had completed a comprehensive accounting of all identified assets, providing a clear picture of our progress in containing Nathan's financial resources. Vanessa's flight has landed, Diana reported as I carefully settled into my position at the command center. Our team at the airport has visual confirmation of her arrival. She appears to be traveling light, one carry-on suitcase and a laptop bag. The image appeared on the main screen. Vanessa Lockwood emerging from the customs area at Owen Roberts International Airport. Tall, blonde, wearing expensive but understated travel attire and oversized sunglasses. In any other context, she would appear to be just another affluent professional on a Caribbean getaway. Now, she was the final piece positioning in our operational chessboard. Ground transportation? I asked, studying her movements. Pre-arranged taxi, Diana confirmed. Based on the driver's greeting, she's heading to the Eastern Shore Villa where Nathan relocated this morning. Perfect. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Now we needed to prepare for the direct confrontation I had insisted upon despite the team's reservations. Communication status? I asked, turning to the technical specialist Diana had brought in, a former NSA analyst named Kevin who had established our secure systems. Ready whenever you are, he replied, making final adjustments to the specialized equipment. The call will be routed through multiple proxies to mask our location. Audio only, no video capability to prevent any visual identification of your surroundings. The line is encrypted and untraceable. I nodded approval, then addressed the team collectively. I want everyone to understand the parameters of this communication. This isn't a negotiation or an attempt to recover assets through direct agreement with Nathan. Those processes are already in motion through legal channels. This is about ensuring he understands exactly who has dismantled his plan and why. Rebecca looked concerned, but resigned to my decision. What's your timeline? I want Vanessa to arrive at the villa first, I replied. I want them both present when I make contact. Based on Diana's surveillance estimate, that gives us approximately 30 minutes to finalize preparation. As the team completed their assigned tasks, I found myself contemplating the approaching confrontation. What would Nathan say when he heard my voice? Would he express remorse, offer justifications, or maintain the calculated facade that had characterized our marriage? More importantly, what would I say to the man who had betrayed me so completely? Diana's tablet chimed with an update from her. Ground team. Vanessa has arrived at the villa, she reported. Surveillance indicates an emotional reunion. Nathan appears agitated, gesturing repeatedly toward his laptop while explaining something to her. Their body language suggests tension rather than relief at being reunited. Audio surveillance? I asked, wondering if we could capture their conversation. Diana shook her head. External only at this location. We can see but not hear them. It's time, I decided, carefully adjusting my position to minimize physical discomfort while maintaining focus. Establish the connection. Kevin nodded, typing a series of commands into his specialized equipment. Line secure. Ready when you are. The room fell silent as I took a deep breath, centering myself for what would come next. This moment represented more than just a conversation. It was my first direct engagement with the architect of my betrayal since awakening from surgery. To discover his deception, dial, I instructed, my voice steadier than I felt. The phone rang 3 times before being answered. Hello? Nathan's voice emerged from the speaker, wary and slightly breathless. Hello, Nathan, I replied, the familiar yet now foreign sound of his voice sending an unexpected wave of complex emotions through me, a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by several seconds of silence. Olivia, not a question but a statement, his tone a mixture of disbelief and calculation. This is unexpected. I imagine it is, I agreed, keeping my voice deliberately calm. You thought I'd still be heavily medicated in a hospital bed, didn't you? Too weak and devastated to function. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost visualize him recalibrating, assessing this new development in his rapidly deteriorating situation. How did you get this number? He finally asked, deflecting rather than addressing my statement directly. The same way I found the 17 accounts you established across 6 financial institutions, I replied evenly. The same way I secured freezing orders in Massachusetts, New York, Florida, and as of this morning, the Cayman Islands. The same way I located you and Vanessa at the villa on Eastern Sound Road. I deliberately included specific details, the exact number of accounts, the precise jurisdictions where we'd frozen assets, the specific location of the villa, wanting him to understand the comprehensive nature of our intelligence. You've been busy for someone who just had open-heart surgery, he said, attempting to maintain composure, though I could hear the strain in his voice. Not as busy as you've been over the past 7 months, planning to abandon your wife and steal our joint assets while I was unconscious on an operating table. That level of calculated betrayal requires significant effort, doesn't it? The accusation hung in the air between us. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from surprise to a harder edge I recognized from rare moments when his careful mask had slipped during our marriage. This is pointless, Olivia. Whatever you've managed to freeze temporarily, I have legal teams working to release. This will all be handled through proper channels. Like forging my signature on retirement account withdrawals, I interrupted. Is that your idea of proper channels, Nathan? I don't know what you're talking about, he attempted. But the defense sounded hollow even to him. We both know that's a lie, I replied calmly. We have the documentation, the forged signatures, the timeline showing transactions initiated precisely when my surgery began. The fraud case is devastating, Nathan. Your carefully constructed extraction has left a trail of evidence that would impress even the most jaded prosecutor. I paused, allowing the reality of his situation to sink in. But that's not why I'm calling. Why are you then? He asked after a moment, wariness evident in his voice. To make sure you understand exactly what's happening. This isn't just about recovering stolen assets, Nathan. This is about consequences. Comprehensive, inescapable consequences for what you've done. I could hear muffled conversation on his end. Vanessa's voice asking questions I couldn't quite discern, his hand presumably covering the microphone as he responded. You don't understand what you're doing, he said when he returned his attention to our call. You're making a mistake that— No, Nathan, I cut him off. You made the mistake. Several, actually. You miscalculated who I am, what I'm capable of, and, most importantly, what resources I have at my disposal. Another pause, this one heavy with calculation. What resources? He finally asked, his voice reflecting the first hint of genuine uncertainty. Did you really think my father would leave me completely financially dependent on my husband? I asked, allowing a hint of genuine curiosity into my tone. Thomas Westbrook, who built one of Boston's most respected financial advisory firms from nothing? The man who lectured his daughters about financial independence from the moment we could understand the concept of money? The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me my words had hit their mark. Nathan had always respected, perhaps even feared, my father's financial acumen. What are you saying? He asked, careful neutrality not quite masking his growing concern. I'm saying that while you were methodically planning to steal $4.6 million from our joint accounts, you overlooked something critical. The investment my father established for me under my maiden name, managed through the family office, completely separate from our married finances. Silence stretched between us as Nathan processed this revelation. When he spoke again, there was a new quality to his voice. Something approaching grudging respect beneath the obvious concern. Cardia Innovations, he said quietly. The cardiac monitoring technology company. My surprise must have transmitted through the line, because he continued with a bitter laugh. You think I didn't know about it? I found reference to it in your father's estate papers years ago. I just could never locate the actual investment. No statements, no documentation in our home files. And yet you never mentioned it, I observed. You were waiting, weren't you? Hoping to eventually find a way to access it before making your move. How much? He asked instead of answering, the financier in him needing to understand the full picture. Current valuation $7.8 million following FDA approval and their successful IPO, I replied, allowing myself the small satisfaction of delivering this particular piece of information. More than enough to fund the comprehensive legal and investigative operation that's systematically dismantling your escape plan. The silence that followed contained multitudes. Shock, calculation, perhaps even a grudging acknowledgement of defeat. I could almost visualize him processing the implications, recalculating, options that were rapidly diminishing. "What do you want?" he finally asked, the question of a man recognizing his declining position. "Justice," I replied simply. "Complete and inescapable. The courts will handle the financial aspects, fraud charges, asset recovery, divorce proceedings. But I wanted you to understand something personally, Nathan." I paused, ensuring my next words would have maximum impact. "You didn't just steal money from me. You took my trust, my sense of security. 8 years of my life invested in someone who could calculate the optimal moment to abandon me at my most vulnerable. Those things can't be quantified in financial terms, but they still demand restitution, and I intend to ensure you pay that debt in full." "Threats, Olivia?" "That's not like you," he attempted, a final effort to regain some semblance of control. "Not threats." "Promises," I corrected. "And you're right, it's not like the woman you married. But that woman no longer exists. You killed her on the operating table when you executed your betrayal. The woman I've become is someone else entirely, someone you should have considered before implementing your plan." Before he could respond, I continued. "The Belize accounts will be frozen by the end of day. Singapore already implemented preliminary holds this morning. Your contingency protocols have been identified and neutralized. There is no escape route, Nathan. Only consequences." With that, I nodded to Kevin, who terminated the connection, leaving Nathan's response forever unspoken. The room remained silent for several moments after the call ended, the team processing the confrontation they had just witnessed. Rebecca was the first to speak, her expression reflecting both concern and admiration. "That was formidable," she said quietly. I nodded, suddenly feeling the physical toll of the intense exchange. Despite maintaining outward composure throughout the call, my body was registering the stress with increased pain and fatigue. Diana checked her tablet, reviewing real-time updates from her surveillance team. "Nathan and Vanessa are in significant distress," she reported. "Multiple urgent phone calls being placed. They appear to be implementing some form of emergency protocol." "Let them," I replied, allowing Elise to check my vitals as exhaustion began to overtake me. "Every avenue is being monitored. Whatever countermeasures they attempt will only provide additional evidence for the criminal proceedings." Marcus, still connected via video link, cleared his throat. "The Belize Banking Commission has scheduled an emergency hearing for 4 p.m. their time, about 3 hours from now. Victoria is confident we'll secure the freezing orders there as well." I nodded acknowledgement, too drained for further discussion. The confrontation with Nathan had extracted a greater emotional and physical toll than I had anticipated. Hearing his voice, once so familiar and comforting, now revealed as belonging to a stranger who had calculated my destruction, had reopened emotional wounds I'd been too busy to fully process. Elise frowned at the cardiac monitoring data. "You need immediate rest," she insisted, no longer willing to compromise on my medical needs. "Your heart rate and blood pressure are concerning." This time, I didn't resist as she adjusted my medication and reclined my chair. The operational momentum had been established, the confrontation delivered, the message sent. Nathan knew exactly who had dismantled his escape plan and why. That knowledge would accompany him through every subsequent legal proceeding, every asset seizure, every criminal charge. As medication began to pull me toward much-needed rest, I found myself reflecting on the transformation the past week had wrought. The woman who had trusted completely, who had believed in the partnership of marriage, who had seen the best in others even when evidence suggested caution, that woman was indeed gone, replaced by someone more guarded, more strategic, and, ultimately, more formidable. Nathan had created his own nemesis through betrayal, a fitting consequence among the many still to come. When I awoke several hours later, the rhythm of the command center had changed. Where before there had been the measured focus of an operation proceeding according to plan, now there was an energy of rapid developments requiring immediate response. "What's happened?" I asked, carefully adjusting my position as Elise checked my vital signs with professional efficiency. Diana approached, her usual composed demeanor reflecting subtle tension. "Nathan and Vanessa have left the villa. Approximately 90 minutes ago, they departed in separate vehicles, Nathan in his rental car, Vanessa in a taxi. Our surveillance teams are tracking both targets, but they appear to be implementing a separation strategy." "Destinations?" I asked, accepting the water Rebecca handed me while processing this development. "Nathan is heading toward the northern end of the island," Diana reported, displaying a map on her tablet. "Vanessa is proceeding to what appears to be a private marina on the western shore. The pattern suggests a potential departure attempt." James joined us, bringing updated financial intelligence. "The Belize Banking Commission hearing concluded 30 minutes ago. Freezing orders were granted for the remaining accounts. Nathan attempted to access those funds approximately 45 minutes before the hearing but was unsuccessful due to the preliminary holds already in place." I nodded, piecing together the timeline. "So he discovered the Belize accounts were already restricted, then immediately implemented an escape protocol. Where does that leave his accessible resources?" "Severely limited," James confirmed. "Based on our latest financial trace, we estimate he has perhaps $50,000 to $75,000 in cash and portable valuables, primarily jewelry and watches. Everything else is now legally contained." "What about transportation options?" I asked Diana, growing increasingly concerned about potential escape routes. "Commercial flights are effectively closed to them," she replied. "We've coordinated with authorities to flag their passports, and airport security has been briefed. Private aviation is more problematic. There are several charter services on the island with varying levels of compliance with international regulations. And maritime options? Numerous and difficult to control comprehensively," Diana acknowledged. "The Western Marina where Vanessa is heading specializes in private yacht charters and has connections to several Caribbean destinations, with limited extradition enforcement." I processed this information quickly, recognizing the emerging risk. While we had successfully contained their financial resources, physical departure from Grand Cayman could significantly complicate the legal proceedings necessary for full justice. A conviction in absentia would be hollow compared to Nathan facing the consequences in person. "Marcus needs to escalate the criminal charges immediately," I decided. "We have more than sufficient evidence of fraud to justify arrest warrants rather than just financial preservation measures." Rebecca, who had been monitoring Marcus's communications, nodded agreement. "He's already preparing the documentation. The challenge is jurisdictional coordination. We need the Cayman authorities to execute any U.S. warrants, which requires additional diplomatic processes." "Time estimate?" She grimaced slightly. "Best case scenario, 24-48 hours for full processing." "Too long. Nathan and Vanessa could be well beyond reach by then, especially if they had prepared maritime escape routes as part of their contingency planning. We need local intervention," I concluded. "Diana, what resources do we have for direct interdiction if they attempt to leave by sea?" Diana considered the question with professional assessment. "My team includes 2 former special operations personnel with maritime experience. We also have established relationships with 2 Cayman Islands Marine police officers. However, without formal warrants, their official intervention options are limited. The implications were clear. We were approaching the boundaries of the BOM legal process. Any direct intervention without proper authority risked undermining the carefully constructed legal case we had built. "There's another option," James suggested, his usual conservative approach giving way to pragmatic recognition of our situation. "The financial evidence we've assembled meets the threshold for a local investigation under Cayman Islands anti-money laundering statutes. Victoria could petition for an emergency investigative detention. It would be temporary, but potentially sufficient to prevent departure while the formal warrants are processed." I nodded, the strategy aligning with both our immediate needs and longer-term objectives. "Make the call. Have Victoria proceed immediately with whatever local legal mechanisms can secure them physically while we complete the international warrant process." As James contacted Victoria to implement this approach, Diana's team continued tracking Nathan and Vanessa's movements across the island. The surveillance feed showed Nathan arriving at what appeared to be a small legal office in a commercial district near Rum Point, while Vanessa continued toward the private marina. "They're splitting responsibilities," I observed. "Nathan is likely securing last-minute legal arrangements while Vanessa prepares transportation." Diana nodded. "Classic evasion protocol. Division of tasks to maximize efficiency and minimize detection patterns. They're well prepared." The realization sent a fresh wave of cold determination through me. Nathan hadn't just planned his financial extraction. He'd developed comprehensive contingency measures in case of discovery. The level of premeditation was staggering and damning. "Do we have identification on the legal office Nathan entered?" I asked. Diana consulted with her field team via secure text, then displayed information on her tablet. "Oceanic Trust Services, specializing in rapid creation of shell companies and asset protection structures. Known for expedited processing and minimal documentation requirements. He's attempting to establish new financial conduits before departure," James assessed, his expertise in financial structures evident. "Likely creating mechanisms to access any resources that might remain unfrozen, or that could be established under new identities in non-cooperative jurisdictions." The professional intelligence felt almost admirable in its methodical thoroughness, if it weren't so morally reprehensible. Nathan had approached betrayal with the same attention to detail he had once brought to investment management. Thorough, research, contingency planning, risk mitigation strategies. But now his resources were dwindling, his options narrowing by the hour. Each account frozen, each escape route identified, each contingency neutralized, the noose tightening with inexorable precision. Victoria called 15 minutes later, her voice reflecting both urgency and professional satisfaction. "I've secured an emergency investigative detention order under Section 4.3 of the Cayman Islands Financial Crimes Act," she reported. "Local authorities are dispatching officers to both the Rum Point location and Western Sound Marina. The detention authority is limited to 36 hours for investigation of financial crimes, but that should provide sufficient time for the international warrant process." "Excellent work," I acknowledged, relief evident in my voice despite my attempt at professional detachment. "Keep us updated on execution and any complications." No sooner had we ended the call than Diana received an urgent update from her field team. "Nathan's on the move again," she reported, displaying real-time tracking on the main screen. "He's left the legal office and appears to be heading toward the marina where Vanessa was tracked." "They're consolidating for departure," I concluded, watching the tracking markers converge on the digital map. "ETA to potential intersection with authorities?" Diana performed rapid calculations. Based on current trajectories, local police should reach the marina approximately 8 minutes before Nathan arrives. Assuming Vanessa is still on site, they should be able to execute the detention order on both subjects. The next 30 minutes unfolded with the tense anticipation of a thriller's climax. Diana's field team provided real-time updates as local authorities arrived at the marina and located Vanessa aboard a 58-foot private yacht named Escape Velocity, an ironically appropriate name given the circumstances. She was detained without incident, though reportedly protesting vehemently about legal representation and harassment. Nathan's tracking marker continued steadily toward the marina, unaware of what awaited him. 10 minutes later, Diana received confirmation of his arrival and subsequent detention as he attempted to board the yacht. Both targets secured, she announced, the professional satisfaction in her voice unmistakable. Local authorities have formally advised them of the investigative detention order and are transporting them to the Financial Crimes Division headquarters for processing. A collective release of tension swept through the command center. The immediate risk of physical escape had been neutralized, providing the necessary time buffer for formal criminal charges and international warrants to be processed. Nathan and Vanessa were now firmly within the legal system's grasp, exactly where they belonged. As the team began coordinating next steps with Marcus and Victoria, I found myself experiencing an unexpected emotional response. Not triumph or vindication, as I might have anticipated, but something more complex. A bittersweet mixture of relief and profound sadness. The man I had loved, trusted with my life and future, had not only betrayed me financially, but had prepared extensively for every contingency except one: the possibility that I might be stronger than he believed. His meticulous planning had accounted for my physical vulnerability, my trusting nature, my aversion to conflict. But he had failed to recognize the resilience that had always existed beneath those qualities. Rebecca noticed my uncharacteristic silence amid the operational success. "You did it, Liv," she said quietly, taking a seat beside my medical recliner. "They're contained, the assets are secured, the legal process is proceeding exactly as planned." "I know," I replied, struggling to articulate the complex emotions swirling beneath my composed exterior. "It's just seeing the extent of his preparation, the layers of contingency planning. He spent months, possibly years, plotting this betrayal, while sharing my bed, making plans for our future, holding my hand during medical consultations." Rebecca nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. The capacity for compartmentalization is what makes betrayal possible. Some people can maintain completely separate realities within themselves, the loving spouse in one compartment, the calculating predator in another. "And now?" I asked, a question directed more at myself than at her. "Now the compartments collapse," she replied simply. "Reality asserts itself. Actions have consequences. The legal system may be imperfect, but it's remarkably effective at imposing order on chaos and accountability on deception." She was right, of course. The system we had mobilized, legal, financial, investigative, was now fully engaged. What had begun as a personal betrayal had transformed into a comprehensive legal case spanning multiple jurisdictions, with significant criminal implications beyond the financial recovery. Elise approached with medication and a professionally stern expression. "Your heart rate is elevated again," she observed, adjusting my monitoring equipment. "I understand the operational developments are significant, but your physical recovery remains precarious. You need real rest, not just brief medication-induced intervals between crisis management." For the first time since awakening to Nathan's betrayal, I found myself truly acknowledging the physical toll of the past week. The surgical trauma, inadequate recovery time, constant stress, and emotional upheaval had extracted a price my body could not indefinitely sustain. "She's right," Rebecca agreed, concern evident in her expression. "The immediate crisis is contained. Nathan and Vanessa are in custody. The assets are secured. The legal machinery is in motion. You can afford to focus on healing now." Perhaps they were right. The compulsive drive that had propelled me through the past week, the need to counter Nathan's betrayal with immediate, comprehensive action, had served its purpose. The existential threat had been neutralized. The remaining process could proceed through legal channels without my constant oversight. 24 hours, I conceded finally. A full day of actual recovery protocols without operational involvement unless absolutely critical. Elise nodded approval, already preparing more substantial pain management than I had previously allowed. That's a start, she said diplomatically, though her expression suggested she would prefer a significantly longer withdrawal from active management. As the medication began to take effect, dulling the persistent pain that had become my constant companion, I found my thoughts turning from the immediate tactical success to broader implications. What came next? Not just in terms of legal proceedings and financial recovery, but in terms of personal rebuilding. The woman I had been before surgery no longer existed. The woman who had emerged in response to betrayal had served her purpose, admirably. Now, a third incarnation would be required, someone who could integrate these experiences into a new identity, not defined solely by either naive trust or vengeful determination. As consciousness began to fade into the first truly restful sleep I had experienced since surgery, one thought provided unexpected comfort. While Nathan had taken much from me, he had inadvertently given me something precious in return: the irrefutable knowledge of my own strength, resilience, and capacity to overcome even the most devastating betrayal. It wasn't a fair exchange by any measure, but it was something to build upon as the future unfolded beyond the boundaries of betrayal and retribution. 3 months had passed since Nathan and Vanessa's detention in Grand Cayman. Autumn had transformed Cambridge's landscape, painting the eye. Trees surrounding the Westbrook compound in brilliant hues of amber and crimson. The physical therapy room we had established in the garden house's sunroom provided a perfect view of this seasonal metamorphosis, a fitting backdrop for my own ongoing transformation. Excellent progress, Dr. Patel noted during my quarterly cardiac assessment, reviewing the monitoring data with evident satisfaction. The valve repair is holding beautifully, cardiac function has returned to normal parameters, and your overall recovery metrics are impressive considering the accelerated timeline. I smiled, acknowledging the implied criticism in her final comment. Dr. Patel had never fully approved of my decision to discharge myself early and pursue Nathan while still in the acute recovery phase. Her medical concern had been valid, though. The compromise we'd eventually reached, comprehensive home care with Elise's professional oversight, had proven effective. Does that mean I can finally discontinue the monitoring equipment? I asked, gesturing toward the portable cardiac monitor I'd worn continuously since leaving the hospital. She considered this with professional caution. I believe we can transition to intermittent monitoring rather than continuous, daily readings rather than constant transmission. But, she added with pointed emphasis, only if you maintain your current activity restrictions for at least another month. A fair compromise. The constant monitoring had been necessary but intrusive, a persistent reminder of both physical vulnerability and the betrayal that had exploited it. Its removal would represent another step toward whatever normal might eventually become. After Dr. Patel departed, Rebecca arrived for our weekly lunch, a tradition we had established during my recovery. She brought takeout from my favorite Vietnamese restaurant and news about the ongoing legal proceedings. The plea agreement was finalized this morning, she reported as we settled in the garden room, autumn sunshine streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Nathan will serve 5 years for wire fraud, identity theft, and exploitation of an incapacitated person. Financial restitution of $4.8 million, including penalties and interest. I nodded, absorbing this information with surprising emotional detachment. The prospect of Nathan in federal prison should have felt more triumphant than it did. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction regarding justice served and lingering, sadness for the relationship that had been revealed as fiction. And Vanessa? I asked, more out of completeness than genuine interest. 2 years with possibility of parole after 14 months, Rebecca replied. Lesser charges due to more limited involvement in the planning phases, though the prosecution established her knowledge of the overall scheme. The legal consequences had unfolded with methodical precision over the past 3 months. From the initial detention in Grand Cayman to extradition to Massachusetts, from indictment to the negotiated plea agreements that had concluded today, each step representing the system's measured response to calculated betrayal. How do you feel about it? Rebecca asked carefully, studying my expression. I considered the question seriously, searching my emotions for the honest answer rather than the expected one. It feels appropriate, I finally replied. Proportional to what they did, but not defining my existence going forward. Does that make sense? She nodded, understanding immediately. Perfect sense. Justice without consuming your life in pursuit of it. That had been the greatest challenge of the past months, extracting myself from the intensity of purpose that had carried me through those first crucial weeks. The single-minded focus on dismantling Nathan's escape plan had served its purpose, but continuing to center my life around his punishment would have granted him a power he no longer deserved. The Cardia board meeting went well yesterday, I commented, deliberately changing the subject. They've approved the expanded research initiative for pediatric cardiac monitoring. The funding should support development through clinical trials. This represented my newest focus, active involvement with Cardia innovations beyond mere investment. The company whose technology had inadvertently saved me from financial devastation was now a significant part of my professional future. 3. Weeks ago, I had accepted a position on their board of directors, providing strategic guidance for their expansion into new medical monitoring applications. James mentioned you're considering liquidating more shares, Rebecca noted. Something about a foundation? I nodded, warming to this topic that represented forward momentum rather than past grievances. The Westbrook Foundation for Cardiac Innovation. Initial funding of $2 million focused on supporting emerging technologies for early detection and intervention in cardiovascular disease. Creating the foundation had been a way to transform something painful into something purposeful. The betrayal that had occurred during cardiac surgery would now fund research to advance cardiac care. The symmetry felt right, a way to create meaning from trauma rather than remaining defined by it. Dad would be proud, Rebecca said softly. Not just of the foundation, but of everything you've handled these past months. Her words touched something deep within me, the desire for paternal approval that persisted even years after his death. Our father had built his life around principles of financial prudence, strategic thinking, and quiet resilience. In navigating Nathan's betrayal, I had drawn on those inherited qualities more than I had realized. I hope so, I replied simply. After lunch, I had my daily physical therapy session with Michael, who had replaced my initial therapist once the acute recovery phase had passed. A former athletic trainer with specialized cardiac rehabilitation experience, Michael pushed my physical recovery with the perfect balance of challenge and caution. Cardiovascular endurance is improving significantly, he noted as I completed the prescribed treadmill interval. Another few weeks, and we can discuss returning to tennis. Modified rules initially, of course. The prospect of returning to the court, something I had enjoyed regularly before surgery, represented another milestone in reclaiming normal life. Each such marker, from discontinuing medications to resuming favorite activities, helped establish the boundary between the trauma of betrayal and whatever came next. Evening brought a video call with James, who now managed the restructured Westbrook financial portfolio with characteristic efficiency. The final asset division has been approved by the court, he reported, reviewing documents on his screen. With the restitution from Nathan's plea agreement, your financial position is now fully restored, with the Cardia shares remaining entirely separate as they always were. The legal and financial restoration was complete. a testament to the effectiveness of the team we had assembled and the strategy we had implemented. What had begun as catastrophic betrayal had concluded with comprehensive resolution, at least in material terms. "Have you given any thought to the brownstone?" James asked, referring to the Beacon Hill property that had been our marital home. I had deliberately avoided decisions about the property, unwilling to confront the emotional complexities it represented. Now, with Nathan's legal fate decided, and financial matters resolved, the question could no longer be deferred. "I don't want to keep it," I decided, the certainty emerging as I spoke the words. Too many memories, and not the home I would choose now if starting fresh. Let's list it, use the proceeds to pay off the remaining mortgage, and close that chapter completely. James nodded, making notes. "I'll have the real estate division prepare a market analysis. The Beacon Hill market remains strong despite economic fluctuations elsewhere." After concluding business matters, James hesitated momentarily before asking, "How are you really doing, Olivia, beyond the financial and legal resolutions?" The question was becoming familiar. Friends and family checking the emotional temperature beneath the composed exterior I presented. I appreciated their concern, while sometimes finding it difficult to articulate the complex inner landscape I navigated daily. "I'm recalibrating," I replied, choosing my words carefully. Learning to trust my judgment again, despite such profound misjudgment of Nathan. Figuring out what comes next when your life narrative is so dramatically interrupted. James nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding beyond professional financial management. "Your father used to say that life's greatest challenges reveal character rather than create it. I believe he was right." The observation resonated deeply. Nathan's betrayal hadn't fundamentally changed who I was. It had stripped away pretense and revealed the core strength that had always existed beneath more accommodating exterior layers. The woman who had emerged wasn't new so much as distilled, the essential elements of identity concentrated through adversity. Later that evening, as autumn darkness fell early over the Cambridge compound, I found myself sitting in the garden room with a glass of wine, recently approved by Dr. Patel in moderate amounts, reflecting on the journey of the past 3 months. The physical healing had progressed remarkably, my body repairing itself, with greater resilience than medical protocols had predicted. The professional reorientation was proceeding smoothly, with the Cardia board position and foundation establishment providing meaningful purpose. The legal and financial resolution had concluded with appropriate consequences for Nathan and Vanessa. What remained less defined was the emotional path forward. How does one rebuild trust after such profound betrayal? What form would future relationships take when shaped by the knowledge of how complete deception could be sustained by someone sharing your life? These questions had no simple answers, no linear recovery protocol like the one guiding my physical healing. They would require time, perspective, and the courage to remain open to connection, despite having experienced its darkest betrayal. My phone chimed with a calendar notification, a reminder of tomorrow's consultation with the architectural firm designing the foundation's headquarters in a repurposed industrial building near Kendall Square. Another step forward, another piece of the future taking tangible form. 6 months ago, I had entered surgery trusting and vulnerable, believing in the partnership of marriage and the security of shared financial resources. I had awakened to a world where those certainties had been shattered by calculated betrayal, where the man who had promised to be there when I woke had instead used my unconsciousness to dismantle our shared life. Now, as autumn deepened outside my windows, I found myself occupying a third reality, neither naive trust nor vengeful determination, but something more nuanced. Cautious, but not closed. Strategic, but not cynical. Healing, but forever changed by the wound. Nathan had taken much from me in those hours while surgeons repaired my heart. But in the process of reclaiming what was stolen, I had discovered resources within myself that could never be taken. Resilience, clarity, determination, and the capacity to rebuild from betrayal's ashes. My father's voice seemed to whisper from memory. Financial independence is security, Olivia. Never forget that. He had been right, though in ways neither of us could have anticipated. The financial independence he had insisted upon had indeed provided security when I most needed it. But the true security, I now understood, lay not in the Cardia shares themselves, but in the self-reliance, strategic thinking, and resilience he had instilled alongside those material resources. As I watched nightfall transform the garden room windows into mirrors reflecting my image back at me, I raised my glass in a silent toast to my father's foresight, to the team that had helped me secure justice, to the surgeons who had repaired my physical heart, and most importantly, to the woman reflected in the glass. She had survived betrayal, not just financially but fundamentally. She had pursued justice without being consumed by vengeance. She was now navigating forward rather than remaining defined by what had been taken or even what had been recovered. That woman, still healing, forever changed, increasingly whole, represented the most meaningful victory of all. Looking. For more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.